Love is our true divine nature, and our heart serves as the intersection of the spiritual and physical, connecting our soul with our body as the conduit for anchoring our divinity onto the earth plane. Embodying our divinity is the key to our ascension and to manifesting our highest destiny in this life. The teachings of the heart are alchemy. Join spiritual mentor and channel Jennifer Spohr each week on a sacred journey to lift the veil to remembering your divinity and meet other beautiful souls who are living the path of the awakened heart. Hey everyone, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome as a guest to the show today, Alyse Bacine. She is a breathwork and trauma expert with 24 years of experience, and she is the CEO of Alyse Breathes LLC. Alyse uses her unique healing modality, the Metamorphosis Method, to help spiritually intelligent women transform current realities to get to their next level selves. Her programs are deeply rooted in healing so that women can navigate work, love, and life as powerful leaders without the burden of trauma playing a role in their highest potential. Welcome, Alyse. So thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you too. And for those who are listening, Alyse and I go back quite a few years. We initially connected in a mastermind together, and I was also recently had the honor of being a guest on her podcast, Reclaiming Consciousness, which is an amazing show. If you haven't heard of it, I highly encourage you to follow her and to follow that show. And so I'm just really grateful that we've reconnected and that we're here again today.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be good. So, I'd love for you to start by sharing with us more about your work, because before we hit record, I was saying, it's like you think you hear about breath work all the time, but I really haven't had that many guests on the show who work this deeply, right, with breath work. And then I think the work that you're doing that in connection with trauma work is really innovative. So tell us more about your work and also your origin story. I mean, what truly inspired you to this path?
Okay. So, I think I've always been a spiritual person and like a deep thinker and understood things on a deep level. I don't think I fully understood that as a child, but when I was 19, around like the end of my first year in college, I just really started going down a spiritual path. I was struggling with an eating disorder and anxiety, and I was just looking for answers as to, like, why I was miserable because from my perspective, I didn't really have any reason to be. I had seemingly good parents and a nice upbringing. So I was trying to figure out like why I was unhappy, which led me to first discover yoga. And I started working at a yoga studio. And that was like in 2001 when yoga was like booming and it was like a really exciting thing. The whole yoga community was amazing back then. And once I started working at the yoga studio, I quickly discovered breath work. And I had no idea what it was. And most people didn't at the time in 2001. Like, no one was doing breath work and no one really knew what it was. But there is an incredible breathwork community here in Philadelphia. And they did a class at the yoga studio that I worked at. And I did the class. And nothing even that crazy happened during that class, but there was just something about it that I knew I was supposed to do it. And I started doing every single workshop and training that the Breathwork Center had to offer. It's called the Philadelphia Rebirthing Center. It's the Breathwork Center here in Philadelphia. And every single thing that they offered, I did for like the next 4 years of my life, my whole time while I was in college and after, a little bit after. So I did like four breathworker training programs. I did a breathwork teacher training program, and I did all these workshops. I traveled around and followed different teachers, and I just immersed myself in breath work and everything that was attached to it, which was a lot of personal growth work, a lot of work around understanding your family patterns and dynamics and why you are the way that you are. So at 20 years old, I was like immersing myself in all of this stuff and learning all of this stuff. But it was something that I just, A, was really drawn to, and B, I just naturally knew about. Like, I just knew that all of these things were true, and I just understood relational dynamics very deeply at a very young age. It's just something I naturally could make a lot of sense of. And I also just naturally could help people heal through breath work. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew how to do it. And so it was just something that came so naturally to me. But at the time in my early 20s, I don't think I had the wherewithal to start a business. I also didn't have anyone really modeling that to me. My parents were both teachers. So I became a school counselor eventually. I had a degree in education and I knew I didn't really want to be a teacher. And I went back and got my master's degree in counseling psychology and I became a school counselor because I knew I couldn't be a teacher. I knew I'd be miserable, but I looked at the school counseling position and I was like, I know I could do that job. So I went back and I got my master's degree and I became a school counselor and I was a school counselor for 10 years and I was really good at it. But I think I also knew that that wasn't it for me, that I was meant to help people in a much more profound way. And with all of my background with breath work, I was also a yoga teacher. I just knew at some point I was going to put all of that together and do something else. But the really amazing thing about being a school counselor for so long is it gave me so much experience with traumatized children. So I think it really gave me the knowledge and experience to go on top of my just like natural talents and abilities to develop the methodology that I've developed. So in 2019, I had gotten a new job as a school counselor and I thought it was kind of like my dream job and quickly realized it wasn't. And I was like, well, why am I not happy? And I started working with a coach and she helped me start to see that I wanted to start my own business. So I started my own business at like the very end of 2019, early 2020. And I did not initially plan for it to be an online business, but it was 2020. So quickly, in after I started my business, I was still a school counselor, but then in March we all went home from school and I never went back to school in person. I worked virtually for another until the end of 2020. And then I ran my business full time and it's been about 5 years now. And my methodology, the Metamorphosis Method, has helped hundreds of women. And it's really just a fusion of breath work. And, I've been teaching and facilitating breath work for 24 years now. So I really understand how to use it in a very targeted way to get someone from point A to point B. And also, I think the really important thing to understand about breath work is that it will bring up trauma. And I think that a lot of people may understand that to some degree, but don't really have the tools to be able to walk someone through that trauma in a productive way, in a way that's actually going to help them shift it and move through it. And that's what I've developed the tools to do, is to help people shift their childhood trauma that is keeping them stuck where they are in a very simple and efficient way. And that's what the metamorphosis is. So it's breath work, and then it's my trauma clearing tools, and it's energetic work. And I put it all together in a, like I said, very simple, very efficient way to help people tangibly and quickly move through the trauma that stops them from growing in the way that they desire.
The terms trauma informed, trauma trained are becoming a lot more streamlined than they were even, a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And I speak about embodiment frequently, and I personally think that's still something that's very much missing in this space.
For
And
sure.
I know that your work incorporates that. So what do you think that some of what we see out in the industry in terms of people that claim they're trauma informed, trauma trained, what is missing from their work that they can receive from working with you, from utilizing the metamorphosis method?
Well, I think that, first of all, I just want to say when it comes to being trauma informed or whatever, any practitioner is only going to be able to take someone as far as they've gone within themselves, right? So the
Yeah.
degree of personal growth work and the degree of depth that you've gone within your own being is really going to be the level that you are trauma informed, right? There's more to it. There's a skill set that's involved in being able to understand when your stuff is coming up and put it to the side so you can hold a very clean and clear space for clients to go through transformation. That's a skill set that I think is very much needed in this space and is lacking in the online space and the coaching industry in general. But you also have to have the wherewithal to even understand that you are being triggered or that your stuff is coming up. And in order to do that, you have to have gone somewhat deep into your own process to understand, what your patterns are, what your wounding is, and to be able to put that to the side when you're working with clients. So I just want to speak to that as far as like being trauma informed. I think the difference between my work is I make something very complicated and often confronting and scary for people into something that's very simple to understand. And the way I do that is by simplifying every single thing that you're experiencing in your life and every single thing you experience in your childhood into one thing, which I call your core wound. So basically, the idea is that you could have had all of these different experiences and all of these different traumas and all of these different things happen to you at certain points of your life, but it all goes back to one thing, right? One core wound where if we distill it down, all of those experiences were essentially you recreating that one thing in these different areas of your life. So an example of this would be say that based on your relationships with your parents, the idea or belief that you internalized about yourself was that who you are authentically is not valuable, right? So then everywhere you turn in your life, because that's what you believe to be true, that's what you're going to experience. So in your relationships, your partner will mirror that back to you in either the way that they treat you or just the way you perceive yourself to be treated, right? And in your business, it could affect you to the point where you want to start a business, but you can't because you don't believe that your authenticity is valuable. So how could you start a business based on your authenticity if you don't think it's valuable, right? That you would be stopped in your tracks. And even something as far back as like middle school, right? Everyone brings up stuff that happened in middle school because it's always so traumatic. And they're like, well, I think I'm just traumatized from being bullied in middle school. No, that's never the case. That I'm not saying that doesn't matter because I worked with middle school students. That trauma is real. I'm not denying that, but there's always something that happened before that would make those experiences so traumatizing for you. And it's most likely because there is some wounding you had around not being good enough or not being important or not being valued, right? That when you go through these experiences in middle school, it's poking at your insecurity about the value of who you really are. So typically there's always going to be something that was imprinted in you in early childhood or even while you were still in the womb that you essentially recreate on an energetic level through all areas and circumstances of your life. So what my work does essentially is I will distill down and pinpoint exactly what that thing is and help you see how you're recreating it. And then I have a simple 5-step process. It's called the inner child healing process that helps you to heal and reconcile that wounded part of you so that you start to be able to hold your power across all areas and circumstances of your life.
I'd love for you to share with us more about specifically how someone can be impacted in the womb, because we do hear more about those early childhood years, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we don't hear as much about the womb.
Yep. Yeah. So this is another unique part of my work, which is called birth story. So we're really looking at the circumstances around your birth from conception until 3 months old. So what we're really looking at is like your mother's experience of life, when you were conceived and when you were developing in the womb, your parents' relationship while you were conceived and developing in the womb, what were the other factors that were going on while you were developing in the womb. So I'll give you an example, which is from my own life, which is a great example of this. So when I was in my mother's womb, my parents, who I said were both teachers, they were on strike. It was the biggest teacher strike in the history of Philadelphia in 1981. You can look it up. um, so they were not making any money. When you're on strike, you don't make any money.
Yeah.
So pretty much for most of the time that I was developing in the womb, my parents didn't have any money. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty around how they were going to take care of me, how they were going to provide. And, my mom was in a huge level of fear, along with the fact that my mom also, when she was 19, had a baby that she gave up for adoption, which was also very traumatic. So there was a lot of factors that were creating a lot of fear, especially around money and especially around just like, is everything going to be okay? Because my mom, had a traumatic experience prior to me being in her womb, right? So obviously for me, that created a lot of fear as kind of like my baseline way of operating, because I'm developing in an atmosphere where fear is the thing that's happening. Like that's the main energy. So when you think about a baby developing in the womb, they're literally taking on the cells of the mother, which carry like an energetic signature of what the mother is feeling or experiencing. So I was literally built from fear, specifically around like security, safety, money, all of that stuff. So that's been something that has been a huge point of growth for me and a huge point of like everything kind of coming back to that. And it's not something that I can even put a thought around. It's literally a visceral experience of life. So when we look at the birth story, we're really looking at like this energetic imprint that is creating a lens through which you're seeing the world that you wouldn't necessarily even know is there. It's like a fish in an ocean. Like they don't know they're in water. Like it's like that's what it's like. So those are the types of things that it's really important to look at and understand how that wounding and that imprint creates the experience you're having now. So for me, it's been a lot around looking at the ways that I'm operating from fear that I didn't even realize was operating from fear. Like
Yeah.
especially in my business, like there would just be decisions I would make or ways that I would show up or so many different things that I was operating from fear, but I just didn't even know it because it was just a natural thing for me. So I've had to really go deep into dismantling that and the feelings around that and everything that's associated with it to build a new foundation for how I'm operating in general. So that is just one example of how these things show up, but it's really just about understanding what that deeper blueprint is and then being able to make the connections and draw. I always say patterns and parallels, like see the pattern that's
Yeah.
showing up across the board and then draw the parallel between what you experienced at that time and then how it's showing up now.
Especially with the example that you share of still being in the womb, right? I mean, some of this fear, this trauma, we can be holding it very deeply inside of our bodies. And as the
Yeah.
example of being in the womb, I mean, it's literally in your bloodstream. So I'd
Yeah.
love for you to share more with us about, you don't have to tell us like every play by play about your work, right? But is it a combination of talk therapy and frequency healing, or how are you addressing what's being held in the body?
Yeah, so mainly it's through the breath work. So the way that it works is once we identify what the core wound is, then the first step is accessing the emotions, right? Because the reason why it's still there is because there are suppressed emotions around it, or just emotions that we haven't been able to process. So I always joke like we can't skip over the emotions. I wish we could because it would make it a lot easier, but
Yeah,
we can't skip
it
over
would.
that. So what I'll usually do first is I will help the person access this part of them that felt this way. So whether it is, accessing a moment in time that they feel like represents this energy, or just starting to journal as this part of themselves that felt this way. But usually I'll have them connect with the inner child that felt unsafe or felt afraid, and have them journal as this version of them, right? So that'll start to get them to connect with this part of them and start to access the subconscious and access like what is there, like what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what their experience was. And then we'll use the breath work. So I'll have them use the breath work to access the subconscious mind, start to move and process the deeper emotional energy, and start to connect with the inner child. Because so much of like why we experience blocks or the same patterns in relationships is just because there's an unacknowledged part of us that is trying to get our attention through these circumstances, right? So if we begin to acknowledge and build a relationship with that part of ourselves, it doesn't need to try to get our attention elsewhere. So what we're really doing is using these tools to develop a relationship with this part of us, and then also let yourself feel and process the feeling. So that's the first step. Once we've pinpointed the core wound, is to access the emotion. And that'll be a combination, like I said, of the journaling and the breath work, and then me kind of like, depending on the level that I'm working with you at, like if it's in a group or privately, I'll kind of walk you through the feeling the emotions and helping you understand how to do that in the most efficient way possible without feeling like you're getting like stuck or overwhelmed. And then from there, the whole idea is that then you can start to be able to see, like I said, within every situation, instead of thinking it's about like, oh, my partner is an asshole or whatever, like you then are able to see like it's actually just your wounded inner child. And instead of making it about the situation in front of you, you can address your inner child. And then you do that by feeling your feelings, acknowledging your inner child, and then seeing what it is that they need. And then gradually building this relationship where you give your inner child what she needs in these moments, and you get better and better at it so that you're able to give your inner child what she needs, acknowledge her, and then you can come back to neutral and come back to being able to hold your power. And then you naturally get better and better at that so that you understand how to hold your power inside of all situations and circumstances in your life.
All of that. Processing is so key, right? Because that's what that represents. What we're holding into our body is unprocessed, and
Mhm.
that's
Yeah,
what causes so much of the disease out there. It
exactly.
manifests itself, it eventually manifests itself as mental, physical illness.
Yep. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why the breath work is so important, because not only does it access the subconscious, but it will help you move and process the emotions from your body.
Hmm.
So you're not only like knowing you have them, but you're actually moving them and feeling them.
Yeah. So someone who is in a space in their life where they can benefit from this work, what would be your advice for them in terms of discernment on who they're reaching out to look to invest in for support? Because I can share from my own personal journey, I've definitely had my share of mentors, right? Which can lead us into another conversation, but I've had my share of mentors where, in retrospect, in some of these scenarios, I've realized, wow, I can see that I had this that still needed to be processed. And it's really not about blaming yourself or anything like that.
Mhm.
It's just more about realizing that when we have unhealed, unprocessed wounds within us, it can impact our ability to be discerning in bringing forward the right support that's really going to help us make the shift that we want to make.
Yeah. I mean, I wish there was an easy answer for this. I think there's a few things that are easy that I can say, but also I think at the end of the day, it has to come down to like your own discernment and trusting your intuition. But what I will say when it comes to trauma is you really want to look at, is this person giving you tangible ways that you can walk through this? You know, because I
Yeah.
think that's a really important thing. Because I think a lot of people can sit there and say, like, oh, well, this is your relationship with your mother. Okay, well, how are you helping me walk through that? Right. And are you able to hold a neutral and safe space for me to walk through that? Because to me, like one of the most important things that I teach the women in my certification program is how to hold a safe and clean space because people are not going to heal unless they feel safe. And they need to feel safe in the container with you and feel that you can be fully present with them.
Hmm.
And that's something you definitely want in somebody that you're going to trust to walk you through your trauma. So I would say they have tangible tools and processes that you can understand and that they can articulate. You feel safe and comfortable with them. You feel like they have the ability to hold you through what it is that you need to walk through. And you know that they're able to be present with you and also looking at the results that they have in their own lives, looking at the results their clients have gotten, and you know, being able to see like, okay, you know, this person is walking the walk essentially. But I think that when it comes to trauma, there you want to make sure that the person is giving you a clear pathway forward and it's not just going to be something where you talk about it and stir it all up and then there's no way through, you know. So I would say that's a big thing to look for too.
Yeah, absolutely. On so on the opposite end of that, right? What would be some signs, some easy signs that someone could keep in mind to know when someone's not the right fit for them?
I would say really like if you don't feel comfortable or safe with somebody, like, or you feel, because I feel like there's a difference between when you hire someone and maybe they're a little bit triggering for you, like because they're really powerful or because maybe they're telling you the truth in a way that it's a little scary to hear, but it's like, you still know it's the truth, you know? I think there's a difference between that and somebody who is just not a safe space for you, you know, or who's not going to hold a safe space. So I think you really want to be looking for someone who's capable of holding a safe space, you know, who you trust. And I think anytime you feel like you can't fully share things with people, you know, like where you have to hold back or you feel afraid to say what you think or afraid to say no or afraid to fully share who you are, then I think that would definitely be a red flag also. Because especially when it comes to healing trauma, you want to be able to feel like this person is going to meet you where you're at and not like blame you for what you're going through. You know, I've had so many experiences where clients are triggered and their stuff is coming up and in that moment they think it's about me, right, and they'll project it onto me, but like I have the awareness that I know they're just in their trauma and I'm not going to get offended by that. I'm not going to come back at them and argue with them. I'm literally just going to meet them where they're at because I'm able to see that it's their inner child who doesn't feel safe. They don't actually feel this way about me. They're just triggered in this moment and I'm able to meet them there. And when I do that, they're able to heal and shift it, right? So I think that is really important too, is like having somebody that can meet you where you're at instead of like pushing back or trying to say like you need to take responsibility or you like, you know, I think there's a lot of that out there of like you need to lead yourself or be responsible. And yes, I'm not saying that's not true, but you also want somebody who's going to be able to read when you are triggered and hold space for that to help walk you to the other side because that's when the healing really happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like that you need to, or this is this, that perpetuates this culture that we live in of we mistake intellectually understanding something for embodying it. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done it. I've done it in the past too, right? Not as
Hmm.
much these days, but it's like someone says something and you're like, you immediately say to yourself, well, I know that. Okay, well, that's not it. The question is, have you moved beyond intellectually understanding it to embodying that,
Yep.
right? To walking that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I always joke like I will say the same thing to somebody 50,000 times, but it's not until 50,001 that they actually get it, right? Like they can hear
Yeah.
me and they know it intellectually, but there'll be this time where you can just see that like it sinks in and they get it in their body, and sometimes it takes a long time for that to
Yeah.
happen and they can hear it so many times, but they won't be able to fully
Yeah.
let it drop in.
And that's okay, right? Because we make that
Yeah.
not okay. We
Yeah.
have this idea of some kind of perfectionism around, oh, I am told something once and I master it. That's ridiculous and like not even
No.
realistic.
And everyone does it when they're ready too. Like there's
Yeah.
no like timeline on it either. Like people always say to me like, "Well, how long do you think it's going to take?" And I'm like, I can make an estimate just because I'm good at making estimates now, but like it's going to take as long as it takes,
Yeah.
I can't predict that for people.
Yeah. A lot of this, discernment that we're talking about, and you mentioned this briefly, goes back to being tuned into your intuition, which I speak often of being embodied in your truth, like being grounded in your truth, knowing what that feels like for you in your physical body, right? And that can be
Hmm.
unique for each of us. There's probably an element of that work that you're doing with your clients too, really helping them to get tuned into that voice.
Oh, for sure. I mean, to me, it's a natural byproduct. So, pretty early on, when I started working with clients, what I would see is that as they healed their trauma or just started to really disentangle themselves from their family programming, immediately their intuition would skyrocket, their psychic gifts would come online, or they would also just be so in touch with their purpose and like what they're meant to do. And it happens with everybody. So it's a lot of times not even something that we need to talk about necessarily. It's just that as you kind of remove these layers and stop looking at things through the lens of trauma and just become connected more with yourself, it just happens like where you just naturally are tuned into your intuition, you just naturally trust yourself, and you have a lot more clarity on how to move forward and the confidence to do it.
There are a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast and also people who are in leadership positions. And, there's a very deeply embedded societal program that vulnerability is a weakness, especially when you're
Mhm.
in a leadership role. You and I have both shared experiences with a past mentor, right? In which
Mhm.
actually in your own podcast series have so courageously uh brought forward. What advice would you provide to those listening to be able to more deeply embrace their vulnerability as a strength and as something that can actually illuminate the way forward for others?
Ah, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with like doing the deeper trauma work too, because I think the main reason why people don't feel comfortable being vulnerable is
Mhm.
because they are afraid because when they were younger, they got hurt by being themselves, right? And that's why, like, I'll have a lot of people say to me, well, like, I've done all Brene Brown's work around vulnerability. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
not to like, not
I
to
know,
like make that
not
wrong.
knocking her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of this thing where it's almost to me feels like white knuckling it because it's like, okay, now I'm going to be vulnerable. And it's like, yeah, but like, why don't we address the reason why you didn't feel comfortable being vulnerable in the first place? Because that's the way that you're actually going to move forward. It's not if you just like force yourself to be vulnerable. Like that is kind of not counterproductive because then on the other side, you're probably going to be having anxiety about it or not feeling comfortable, or because you kind of forced yourself to do something like that, you're going to go back in the other direction where you're probably not going to want to
Yeah.
be vulnerable at all for a long time. So let's address the reason why you don't feel comfortable being vulnerable in the first place so that you can shift it permanently instead of just forcing yourself to be vulnerable, you know? So I think that to me, that's the foundation of it, you know? And I think that, yeah, it can be scary to be vulnerable. Like I have that come up for me still. And, you know, especially as somebody who was a child who felt emotionally neglected and emotionally responsible for everyone else, I'm much more comfortable being in the giving role and being in the helping other people role. Like that's where I shine. Like sharing my story is never as comfortable, or sharing my wounding or pain or whatever is never as comfortable for me. And it is scary at times, but I think that because I'm able to do that, it helps people connect with me so much more and like understand where I'm coming from and relate to my story. So I think that's the most important thing about it, is being able to connect with people, because that's when people really feel connected to you, is when you're vulnerable and you share things about who you truly are, not just stuff on the surface.
Yeah, I really believe that is the bridge. That is the key to, this collective shift in consciousness that we've all been talking about, right? Which I think
Mm-hmm.
it's New Earth has become almost more of a buzz term, but
Yeah.
but it really is like we really are experiencing this collective shift. And I believe that it starts with each one of us, in our own house,
Yes.
right? In how we're showing up authentically. And then that has a ripple effect.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because it also invites other people to show up in their authenticity too. Like people
Yeah.
that want to but feel afraid, but then they see other people doing it and they're like, okay, I can do this too. So it really like it models for people like how to do it, and that it's safe to do it, and invites them to do it when they're ready to do it also.
And might I say that you do that well?
Thank you. Thank you. It's not always easy for me. Like I said, I'm much more comfortable in
Yeah,
the teacher slash healer slash,
I feel you. Me
whatever.
too. Yes. Yes. A lot of the things that we do, they might look easy. They're not necessarily easy. It's more about moving through it and choosing to consciously do it. We're human too, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's the other thing that I really have, I don't want to say come to terms with, but I feel like in the you know, coaching industry or whatever you want to call it, there would be like this thing where people would put you on a pedestal or think like, oh, well, you must like know everything. And that's something I never felt comfortable with, because to me, I'm like, I'm just a person.
Yeah.
Like, I happen to be really good at this one thing and I will really help you with that. But like beyond that, like, I'm not like, don't look to me like I like to go drink wine with my friends and eat ice cream, and my husband and I fight sometimes, and sometimes my kids don't
Yeah.
behave. Like, my life is not perfect. I just happen to be good at this thing. So, like, don't put me on a pedestal. And that is the thing that I think has to shift, is like kind of moving beyond this, like, oh, well, this person knows everything. And it's like, I don't know everything. I'm just good
Yeah.
at trauma. So come to me for that, but like let's leave it there. And
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of the shift we're seeing too, is like beyond the like guru paradigm to being like, okay, I know I need help with this specific thing, so I'm going to go to this person who's good at it, but it's not like I'm going to now abdicate my power to this person and let them tell me what to do with every area of my life, you know? So I think that's a very much needed paradigm shift that we're seeing now also.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Ditto to all of that. The fights with the husband, the ice cream, the wine, being good at certain things. That's me. Ditto. I feel you. Alyse, in closing, what else are you feeling guided to bring forward in this now moment?
Well, I don't know. I can't remember if we've talked about astrology, but there's a lot of really exciting astrology going on right now. One of them is Neptune is moving into Aries, which is
Yes.
going to be like a huge energetic shift that's happening in like a week. So Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011. And Neptune is like the planet of illusions and the wool that's pulled over our eyes and images and all of that. And Pisces is such a, wishy-washy. It kind of, to me, the energy of Neptune and air in Pisces is like we're kind of like drudging through mud a little bit. It feels very murky.
Yeah,
Um, and but I do think, it helped us develop our empathy and all of that as a collective. But Neptune moving into Aries, I think we're going to see a very different energy out there in the world. It's Aries is fire. It's much more action oriented and it's new. It's the beginning of the zodiac. So I think we're going to see a lot of shifts. And I've just been really excited for Neptune to move into Aries for so many reasons. So I just wanted to say that because I can feel the shift is happening and it's going to be a very different paradigm, especially with the world stage, so to speak.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it's big. It really is
It's
big. Yeah.
big. Yeah, I'm
It's
excited for
palpable.
it.
It's big. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Alyse, for those who want to connect more deeply with you, where is the best place to find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Alyse_breathes. Also, like you said, my podcast, Reclaiming Consciousness, or my website, AlyseBreathes.com.
Alyse, I mean, I could talk to you for days about so
I
many of the
know.
topics that came forward, and just so honored to have the opportunity to connect with you again, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and just for everything that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Path of the Awakened Heart. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or pathoftheawakenedheart.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about living with an awakened heart and navigating your ascension journey, visit me at jenniferspore.com.